Welcome to POTUS 2016, where we call the presidential horse race and pour cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. The Republican National Convention begins Monday in Cleveland. The Democrats convene a week later in Philadelphia. These come at a time when the country is drowning in grief. Last week, the nation saw a cell phone video of an African-American man shot point blank by a Louisiana police officer. The next day, a live video stream of a Minnesota woman narrating the police killing of her boyfriend during a traffic stop. And then what the Dallas police chief called payback. As a peaceful protest against those deaths was ending, a lone gunman, an African-American veteran of the war in Afghanistan, was taking careful aim. He shot a dozen white police officers who were protecting the demonstrators, killing 5 officers. The nation is still reeling from all of it. Fortunately, the campaign rhetoric cooled, at least for a time. This was rare in a year when one candidate has ridden an undercurrent of racism, while the other has embraced the legacy of the first black president. In a pre-recorded video, Donald Trump expressed sympathy both for the police and the victims of police violence, unusual for him. Hillary Clinton did much the same. Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich repeated his belief that white people don't understand being black in America. That's a Gingrich quote. The current House Speaker was emotional and even-handed.
Every member of this body wants a world in which people feel safe regardless of the color of their skin. And that's not how people are feeling these days. Sometimes we disagree on how to get there. Sometimes we disagree passionately on how to get there. But in having this debate, let's not lose sight of the values that unite us. Let's not lose sight in our common humanity. The values that brought those protesters to the streets in Dallas. The values that brought those protesters to the streets in Washington last night. Respect, decency, compassion, humanity. If we lose those fundamental things, what's left?
By Monday, the rhetoric was heating up again. Trump declared himself the law and order candidate and called Hillary weak. And now we're about to navigate through 2 4-day-long infomercials. What messages will the parties be selling at their conventions in order to gain advantage with the voters? How will Louisiana, Minnesota, and Texas change the conventions? Joining us, Christina Greer, professor of political science at Fordham University and author of Black Ethnics, Race, Immigration, and the Pursuit of the American Dream. Virginia Heffernan, cultural critic and author of, most recently, Magic and Loss, The Internet as Art. And via Skype, Larry Sabato of the University of Virginia's Center for Politics, where he edits the useful website Sabato's Crystal Ball, which tracks elections around the country. Welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, Ryan.
And Virginia, your book is called Magic and Loss. I don't think police shooting videos were exactly what you had in mind, but do you see a kind of magic and loss in them?
I see the, we saw these 2 videos. One is a conventional cell phone video and one is a Facebook live stream of these 2 murders. In the past, we would have to take the loudest voice of which eyewitness gets to tell us what happened. These days, we have lost something serious in the real world and then collectively come to make meaning of that using these videos. I wouldn't go so far as to call that magic, but it is an opportunity to disabuse some of us of the notion that we know what happened just from the accounts of the police or just from the accounts of journalists. Now you can see much more closely what happened in those 2 murders, and I think it's much more difficult to make a mistake about it or to skew it ideologically.
Christina Greer, cell phone or bystander videos of police actions are not that new. I mean, it goes back to Rodney King in the mid-1990s. What's different today, do you think?
Well, keep in mind when Rodney King was beaten on camera, that's someone with a grainy VHS camera. You know, you had to be of a certain class to have a big video camera like that at a certain point in time. Now, almost everyone has a smartphone. Kids that are 10 years old have smartphones, and those smartphones have not just cameras, but video cameras as well. And people are pretty good at using them and using them quickly. I think police violence, we all know, at least many members of the black community know, is not new. This has been going on since America formed a police force, right, to sort of keep track of freed Negroes. So this violence is definitely not new. The fact that it can go viral instantly on Twitter and Snapchat and Facebook to really collect and connect different communities across the country to really create a much wider portrait of the systemic issues. It's no longer just an isolated event about Rodney King in California or Amadou Diallo or Abner Louima on the East Coast. Now we can say, you know, in less than 24 hours, we have two black men murdered by the state. And then in Houston, 48 hours after that.
Larry Sabato, there's a competing set of narratives, I think, about where we are at this moment. To watch the Sunday morning politics talk shows, for example, many of them led with, "We are a nation more divided than in many years, maybe many decades," some version of that. President Obama, however, took to the airwaves and said, "We're not as divided as people would like to think." And then we saw those, the video of Paul Ryan there, and I quoted from Newt Gingrich, kind of getting it about police violence, at least seeming to for the moment, something maybe a lot of more liberal Americans would be surprised to hear from them. And then Donald Trump laying low, and also not just being the law and order candidate, at least in those first few days. From where you sit and having watched politics for as long as you have, how divided are we, and how much of that is really a media exaggeration?
Well, Brian, I hate to admit my age, but I go all the way back to the 50s. So if you're talking about divisions, I can go through the 1960s for you, and not just the Civil Rights Revolution then, but loads of other cultural and social and political developments. We're not nearly as divided as we once were. And in terms of our values about civil rights, we've made enormous progress. So I would have to side with President Obama here. I think that what he said is absolutely true. And you've just proven it by the examples that you cited. You left out one, though, that's very critical. Newt Gingrich, of all people, was sympathetic with the way African Americans view the police. And he actually cautioned and counseled his very conservative supporters to think about this from the perspective of how black Americans would view a police stop versus how they would view it. So, you know, I don't think we're nearly as divided as some people pretend that we are. You know as well as I do, it's all about attracting eyeballs, and it's about ratings, and every crisis creates ratings. I'm not saying that this is unimportant, and I'm not minimizing what just took place. But to use this as some example of deep, unfathomable divisions in the American public is ludicrous.
I think, and Christina, if you want to respond to anything that he just said there, but I also think that the media haven't caught up with the change in the facts from what we thought we knew Friday morning when police in Dallas thought that there was some kind of organized cell or something with multiple snipers from different locations. And who knew if this wasn't the beginning of some American warfare? The New York Post had a headline, "Civil War," Friday morning, over the top by almost any measure. But then we learned that yet again it's an individual mad gunman who's had mental health problems in the military, who's had sexual harassment claims against him. It's just a very different story when it's one guy.
We had Dylan Roof in South Carolina. We have Micah in Texas. And so, when the Post puts civil war, it's a civil war between whom? What are the sides? I agree with Larry. I don't think that we're as divided as, say, we were in, say, the 1950s, 1960s, but we would be remiss not to really investigate some of the beliefs of many Americans who just do not believe in equality. They do not think that black Americans have a justifiable cause to fear the police. I think these cameras are showing us that this is a systemic nationwide problem that we're seeing not just in major cities with the state killing young black people, men and women, but also in towns, right, where police officers are not trained, recruitment policies are abysmal, and they clearly are coming into the job with some preconceived notions of what a black person is or is not.
Let me play a clip of Mitt Romney in 2012 at his convention, and see how differently, and I know you covered this for Yahoo News,
Yeah.
Virginia, how differently we think the 2016 convention is going to go. Here's Romney 4 years ago.
You might have asked yourself if these last years are really the America we want. The America that was won for us by the greatest generation. Does the America we want borrow $1 trillion from China? Does it fail to find the jobs that are needed for 23 million people and for half the kids graduating from college? Are those schools lagging behind the rest of the developed world? And does America that we want succumb to resentment and division among Americans?
So that's a pretty standard list of grievances.
That's right. They sound familiar, though. You know, they don't sound unlike Donald Trump. What's different about it is, and you know, you call these conventions infomercials, and to some extent they are, but infomercials are very civilized affairs. They're consumer-facing affairs, and they're meant to be sort of safe and clean. And you know, a lot of us on the left have said this, looking back at this convention, looking back at Mitt Romney, there's a lot of longing for Republicans with dignity, right? Republicans, you know, you start to look at Mitt Romney and think, God, he was a great candidate when you know what follows in the form of Donald Trump. I think from the conventions this year, we'll hear much more, at least at the Republican convention, much more eccentricity, much more fury, much more id, and much more like kind of open insanity. You know, I'm not totally in agreement with Professor Sabato about this idea that it's ludicrous to say we're divided. I mean, there has been white nationalist rhetoric. It could be that we are just as divided as we were in the 50s and 60s, certainly as much, but both sides have a voice now.
Professor Sabato, pick it up.
Well, I don't think that you can focus on the extremes, these extremist groups, and say that they are all representative of mainstream America in any form.
Well, Donald Trump sounds pretty extreme to me.
I did have to laugh listening to Mitt Romney, though, and I agree that this particular convention is going to make that look like mild-mannered chicken soup. Chaos is the word I'm expecting to be most often applied to Donald Trump's convention.
Chaos in what way?
Well, because first of all, there really isn't an agenda that's been released. We have no idea who's speaking and when and what the message of the day is. And I've been to every convention in both parties since 1976, and I can tell you that this is very unusual. Everything about this year and Donald Trump is very unusual. The Democratic convention will be much more normal. It will be patterned and well organized, but the Republican convention, also because of the delegates there, and they're going to have a lot of contradictory views, but also unsettled views, a lot of unhappy people about the fact that Donald Trump is actually getting the nomination. This is going to bubble to the surface.
And
You can't
Virginia,
stop it.
how do you think it bubbles to the surface in peer-to-peer media, social media, as opposed to just what we're seeing from the convention floor and the convention stage?
Well, there's, you know, especially after these two videos surface, but also in the earlier days of the drumbeat around the Trump campaign, there was a lot of, is this really happening? Is this really happening? I mean, those of us who followed Donald Trump on Twitter for a long time, not officially followed him, but like gone to read his Twitter feed, knew that he was really pressing on the id of this country and being retweeted by characters that had been left out of the party, we thought, for a long time. And in fact, you know, have a very radical voice and speak very, very forcefully and emotionally.
So, Christina, Professor Greer, how do you think the videos, the events in Dallas, Louisiana, Minnesota, are going to change the Republican convention or the Democratic convention?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think it'll change the Republican convention one bit, because we know that there are people coming from all across the country, a multi-racial group of individuals who will be protesting the RNC because they don't believe that this is someone who should be even considered a leader of the country. So unfortunately, I think we are going to see some clashes, because we'll have the Cleveland police in riot gear and sort of military grade weaponry fighting civilians. So unfortunately, I think what may start off as peaceful protests will erupt in something else and really sort of make Donald Trump's point about how he needs to be the law and order candidate.
And Larry, Professor Sabato, how do you see these events of the last week affecting Cleveland?
I don't think it's going to have a great effect. I think the platforms are pretty much set. You may have some more sympathetic dialogue on stage. You may have a little extra pablum. Personally, I'm bringing my gas mask from the 1968 Democratic National Convention.
Yeah. And I don't think that that's a hyperbolic statement. I mean, we know the level of weaponry that this government has and that they've given to police departments. And unfortunately, I think Cleveland will be a mess. And
how about Philadelphia?
Well, Hillary's defined herself by, trying to run a kind of acid campaign in response to what I think is the almost hysterical, campaign of Donald Trump. I mean, he is a male hysteric. He's so emotional. I mean, for him to run on Law and Order, he comes across like a mental patient, I mean, I'm just looking at Mitt Romney right now and thinking about how civilized he is. Well, Hillary definitely is. She imagines that she has civility and civilization at her back. And, and she hasn't been subject to the same kind of protests. Even the Sanders protesters or anti-Hillary protesters weren't as voluble and volatile.
And Larry Sabato, as much as there's a gender gap for Trump among women, there's a pretty large gender gap for Clinton among men. Do you see her reaching out to them at her convention and Trump reaching out to women at his?
Well, I'm sure that both of them will try to reach out, but that's not really how you win votes. In the end, first of all, we're polarized, and most of these votes are already categorized. There's really nothing the candidates can do. But there may be some issues that will attract one group or the other. Let's remember that Hillary Clinton's advantage with women is considerably greater than Donald Trump's advantage with men. And that's even true once you break it down to whites only. So that will influence the conventions to a certain degree. But this goes far beyond the conventions. The election is November the 8th. And the conventions rarely, along with the vice presidential choices, rarely have a significant impact on the final result.
Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
And let's bring in some additional evidence, this time about the ultimate glass ceiling. Time for evidence-based politics, where we pour cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. Since she announced for the presidency, Hillary Clinton's voice, her tone, her volume, her laugh have all been common sources of criticism, even ridicule. Much of the commentary from media personalities, social media, and elsewhere have been called sexist. Let's see some of what's been said.
I think a lot of it with Hillary Clinton has to do with style and delivery, oddly enough. She shouts. There is something unrelaxed about the way she is communicating.
She tends to assume a kind of kindergarten teacher type hectoring tone.
When Barack Obama speaks, men hear, "Take off for the future." And when Hillary Clinton speaks, men hear, "Take out the garbage."
She morphed into a scolding mother talking down to a child.
When she raises her voice, and when a lot of women do, it's, as I say, it reaches a point where every husband in America has heard it one time or another.
Has nobody told her
Kristen has interesting information
that the microphone works?
How much of an obstacle to women getting elected is that kind of thinking? A new study argues that voters don't automatically judge female candidates by gender stereotypes, but are more likely to when prompted by certain triggers. What triggers? Well, joining us via Skype to explain is Nicole Bauer, Assistant Professor of Political Science at the University of Alabama. Her paper, published in Political Psychology, is called Emotional, Sensitive, and Unfit for Office, Gender Stereotype Activation, and Support for Female Candidates. Welcome to our program.
for having me.
So I see you did a study, an experiment, and then you also measured some real election data and results. Tell us about the experiment.
Yeah, so I set the experiment up in 2 stages. And so stage 1 measured just baseline stereotyping of female candidates. I wanted to know if you told a person, a woman's running for political office, and told them their partisanship as well, do voters automatically think, oh, this woman must be weak and emotional and too caring to be a political leader? And I found in stage 1 of the study that if you just gave voters this really basic information, that sort of stereotyping did not take place at all. And it didn't affect vote choice decisions. And one thing that I did in this first stage of the study, and I did it in both stages, is that all participants in this study read about a candidate with whom they shared partisanship. So Democrats evaluated Democrats and Republicans evaluated Republicans, just to help control for any sort of partisan bias that might affect the measurement of stereotypes there. So at a baseline level, voters don't automatically punish women for just being women. Stage 2 of the study followed up with the same participants, and it matched partisanship in the same way. But this time, I found some different dynamics with stereotyping. If women became attached to or described in ways that resonated with feminine stereotypes, then participants in the study were more likely to think of those women as having other feminine characteristics.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah. So if you describe a female candidate as being caring, or if you mention that she has children, right, participants are more likely to think, if she's caring and has kids, she must also be sensitive and weak and not be strong and authoritative. So it puts women in this trade-off position, right, where they're feminine and then they're not having leadership qualities as well. And when that kind of activation effect occurred, support for female candidates in the study plummeted. And this is in a study where partisanship was matched, right? So Democrats were evaluating Democratic women and Republicans were evaluating Republican women. And once you describe those women as caring and compassionate or empathetic, participants no longer were very supportive of those women.
Would you have expected to find that Democrats would be more supportive of women candidates who are described as caring?
Right. So the results among the Democratic participants were really, really striking because we know that most women who run for political office do so as Democrats, and Democrats have this reputation as the party among Democrats. So I was surprised by those results, but they really held up in the study. Democrats were just as likely to punish co-partisan female candidates as Republicans were.
And did you test it on men? I'm curious. That is, with male candidates, and describe them as caring?
I did. I described them as caring and I described them as compassionate. And those descriptors didn't have any effect at all on the male candidates. It didn't really give them a boost, right? Like they didn't get any sort of a huge benefit for being a caring and tough man. But it didn't really have a negative effect either.
And how did the results of the experiment intersect with the data that you looked at from the real world?
Yeah, so the two really intersect and complement each other nicely. With the data I have from real world elections, I wanted to know a couple of things. First, do candidates actually use feminine characteristics in their campaign ads? And they do quite a bit, actually. And when voters see campaign ads that describe candidates as caring and compassionate and sensitive, does that actually reduce support for female candidates? And I found, in fact, that it does. It reduces the probability of voting for a female incumbent by about 10%. And I tested that across 2 election years in House elections, looking at female and male incumbent races.
Does the effect vary between male and female voters?
Yeah, I did not find an effect for participant sex in the real world election results. So participant gender didn't have a huge effect here. Both types of participants were just as likely to respond negatively. What did really matter was how many of these types of ads you might have seen. So in races that were really competitive, where candidates aired a lot of ads describing how they're going to be caring and speak for you in Washington and be an empathetic voice. Participants were, as exposure to those ads increased, participants were far less likely to support those candidates.
So you're describing an experimental world and a real world where female voters are as judgmental of women described with feminine traits as male voters are.
Well, I don't know if I'd use the word judgmental, but they respond similarly in this
negatively.
study. Yes, yeah.
So do you think this applies differently to Hillary Clinton than it might to candidates in House races who you actually looked at the data for?
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how these dynamics play out for Hillary Clinton, because she differs from the types of elections I looked at in a couple of ways. Everybody has an opinion about Hillary Clinton already, and she's a pretty polarizing figure. And so among voters who already dislike Hillary Clinton, kind of feminine characteristics can be a further motivation to vote against her, right? She's too weak for the presidency. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and how much her strategies of playing the gender card, right, and that approach might work against her with different types of voters and just on the broader scale. It's something that I look forward to seeing, but we haven't been able to test because we haven't had a female presidential race to look at.
So do your results suggest that she should emphasize certain kinds of messaging over other kinds of messaging?
She should downplay feminine traits and characteristics and focus more on that expectation we have of a president, which is as a masculine, tough, aggressive, authoritative figure. It's what we expect the president to be, and it's what voters want.
At least according to this study. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
All right, well, thank you for having me.
And that's POTUS 2016 for today. We're here each week at this hour calling the presidential horse race and pouring cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. Next time, it will be Convention Week, vice presidential picks and all. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.